The lobby's marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, their cold sheen reflecting the hesitant footsteps of the Johnson family. Andre adjusted the collar of his hoodie, acutely aware of the receptionist's gaze trailing them first, his wife Nia's braids, then their daughter Zoe's stuffed owl. Claire, behind the desk, straightened her blazer, her red nails tapping the reservation log. Her smile was a tight, practiced curve, a mask that hid the skepticism beneath. Zoe clung to her mother's hand, the owl's frayed wings pressed too, her chest like armor. Checking in, Claire's voice dripped with saccharine politeness. The budget motel is 3 blocks west. Andre met her eyes, unflinching. Penthouse suite. Reservation under Johnson. The name hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Claire's fingers froze mid-air, her smile twitching. She recovered quickly, reaching for the keyboard. "I'll need ID, all of you." Nia's jaw tightened as she handed over her license, her grip on Zoe's shoulder firm. The desk clerk. Beside, Claire glanced away, shuffling papers to avoid the tension. Zoe's small voice broke the silence. "Why's she staring, Mama?" Nia knelt, smoothing her daughter's braids. "Some people forget their eyes can hurt," she whispered. Claire's typing grew louder, her focus fixed on the screen. When it flashed owner's nephew, her breath hitched, the elevator dinged, and Marcus Johnson strode out, his laughter booming. "Andre, you made it." He pulled his nephew into a hug, oblivious to Claire's crumbling composure. Her badge quivered on her chest as Marcus turned, his smile fading when he saw her pallor. Zoe's owl catching the light, Andre's steady posture. Marcus's voice softened, but his words carried, "Let's get you settled." As the family followed him, Claire's polished facade cracked. She stared at the discarded IDs, the owl's glass eyes watching from Zoe's arms. The chandelier dimmed, casting long shadows over her desk. Before the story continues, please let us know from where you are watching this video, right? Your city or country in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you believe in stories that challenge injustice. Your engagement gives power to voices that need to be heard. Claire's hand hovered above the desk, her red nails immaculate, each one a tiny flag of control. She picked up the family's IDs, her fingers lingering just a moment longer on Andre's before she turned to the computer. Her smile returned, this time even tighter, lips barely parting as she spoke. "Thank you for your patience. Just a moment while I verify your information." The words were smooth, but the edge was unmistakably syllable, a gate sliding. Shut. Andre watched her shoulders squared, refusing to shrink beneath her scrutiny. Nia stood beside him, her chin lifted, eyes sharp and unyielding. Zoe, pressed against her mother's side, clutched her owl so tightly it seems groaned. The other receptionist, a young man with a nervous energy, glanced up from his screen, then quickly busied himself with a stack of reservation forms. His cheeks flushed. Claire's eyes flicked from the monitor to the family and back again, searching for something she could question. "I see you've requested a late checkout. That's unusual for first-time guests." Her tone was casual, but the implication was clear. Andre's reply was measured. "We have family businesses in the city. Is there a problem?" Claire shook her head, the corners of her mouth barely moving. "Of course not, just follow standard check-in steps." Nia's jaw clenched. "We'd appreciate a quick process. Our daughter's tired from the drive." Zoe looked up, her gaze meeting Claire's for the first time. The receptionist's expression faltered, just for a heartbeat, before she recovered. She tapped at the keyboard, her nails clicking in rapid succession, a staccato rhythm that filled the space between them. A bellhop approached, pausing as he sensed the tension. He offered a tentative smile to Zoe, who managed a small one in return. Claire ignored the exchange, her attention fixed on the screen. "Everything appears to be in order. I'll print your keycards." Her voice was polite, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a brittle efficiency. As she handed over the keys, her fingers brushed Nia's hand, cold and impersonal. "Enjoy your stay," she said, the words landing like a challenge rather than a welcome. The family turned away, dignity intact, leaving Claire to stare at her reflection in the polished counter. Her smile finally slipping as the reality of her own performance lingered in the air. Zoe pressed her owl to her chest as the family moved away from the desk, the soft fabric warm against her skin. She could still feel the receptionist's eyes. On her, the way Claire's gaze lingered just a moment too long, as if searching for a reason to question their presence. The memory of the lobby's tension followed Zoe, settling in her stomach like a stone dot as they waited for the elevator. Zoe's mind wandered back to a different room, a different kind of scrutiny. She remembered her second-grade classroom, the day her teacher's voice grew sharp. "Did you take that from my desk?" the woman demanded, holding up Zoe's favorite pencil. Zoe had shaken her head, but the teacher's suspicion didn't waver. Her classmates watched, some with pity, others with curiosity, as the teacher rifled through Zoe's backpack. When she found nothing, she offered no apology, just a cold, dismissive nod that told Zoe she would always be doubted. The memory faded. As the elevator doors slid open, Andre guided his family inside, but Zoe's grip on her owl didn't loosen. Nia noticed, kneeling to meet her daughter's eyes. "You're safe, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing a stray braid from Zoe's forehead. "People sometimes see what they want, not what's real. But you know the truth." Zoe nodded, but the sting of being questioned lingered. Inside the elevator, Andre tried to lighten the mood. "First, stop and house. What do you think, Zoe? Biggest room in the building?" Zoe managed a small smile, but her gaze drifted to the owl's glass eyes, which seemed to reflect every uncomfortable moment she'd ever endured. The ride was short, but the weight of the lobby encounter stayed with her. A reminder that innocence is not always enough to shield against suspicion. As the doors opened to their floor, Zoe looked up at her parents, searching their faces for reassurance. Andre offered a gentle nod. Nia squeezed her hand, and together they stepped forward, determined to claim their space in a world that too often questioned their right to belong. Back at the front desk, Claire's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her eyes darting from the family's IDs to the glowing monitor. She typed in the reservation code, her brow furrowing as she double-checked the spelling. The screen refreshed, and a new line appeared in bold letters. "Owner's nephew." For a split second, Claire's composure faltered. Her badge, usually pinned straight and proud, trembled as her breath caught in her throat. She glanced up, searching for Andre, but the family was already halfway to the elevators. The elevator chimed, and Marcus Johnson strode out, his presence filling the lobby with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the earlier chill. "Andre, you made it?" Marcus's voice boomed across the marble, drawing the attention of every guest and staff member. He crossed the lobby in a few long strides, arms wide, embracing his nephew in a way that left no doubt about their connection. The staff behind the desk exchanged uncertain glances, the power dynamic shifting in real time. Claire's face paled. As Marcus turned to her, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. She dropped her gaze, suddenly aware of the weight of her actions. The lobby, once a stage for her authority, now felt exposed. The other receptionist, sensing the change, quietly stepped back, her posture shrinking behind the computer screen. Andre returned Marcus's hug, his voice steady. "Thanks for meeting us, Uncle. We had a bit of a rough welcome." Marcus's gaze flickered to Claire, his smile fading. "That's so." His tone was gentle, but the question carried an unmistakable warning. Claire's fingers curled against the desk, her practiced smile nowhere to be found. Guests nearby watched the scene unfold, some whispering, others simply observing the subtle but unmistakable collapse of the old order. The polished counter, once a symbol of separation, now reflected a different truth. Privilege, when confronted by reality, has nowhere to hide. As Marcus led the family away, Claire remained rooted in place, her badge trembling, her certainty gone. Claire's hospitality-certified pin caught the glare of the lobby's lights, its shine dulled by the tremor in her hands. She stared at it, the metal suddenly heavy, pressing against her chest with a pressure she'd never felt before. Around her, the low murmur of guests and staff faded into the background, the world shrinking to the cold emblem in her palm. It was supposed to mean expertise, authority. Belonging now, it felt like a relic from a world that was slipping away. Across the lobby, Marcus's laughter rang out, deep and effortless, a stark reminder of the power she was losing. He moved with the certainty of someone who had built the very walls around her, his presence filling the space with a new gravity. Zoe stood nearby, her stuffed owl hugged close, watching everything with wide, steady eyes. The shift unfolding, Claire's breath caught as she felt the first fracture in her carefully maintained composure. Her fingers trembled, and the pin slipped from her grasp, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound was sharp, final, drawing the gaze of guests and staff alike. She looked up and met Andre's eyes. For a moment, neither spoke, but the truth between them was unmistakable. The old order, built on exclusion and silent rules, was beginning to fall apart. The marble floor, once a symbol of separation, now reflected Claire's unraveling. Her polished shoes felt heavier with every step, each movement a reminder that the walls she'd relied on were closing in. The grandeur of the lobby seemed to mock her, the chandeliers above, casting fractured light that danced like ghosts of the past. Zoe's owl remained tucked safely in her arms, a symbol of quiet strength in the midst of the storm. Claire's eyes drifted from the child to Marcus, whose smile now carried the promise of transformation. The first crack had appeared, and there was no turning back. The balance of power had shifted, and for the first time, Claire felt the weight of being on the wrong side of history the next morning. The hotel's group chat buzzed with the link security footage had surfaced online. The video showed Claire at the front desk, her posture rigid, lips pressed into a thin line as she scrutinized the Johnsons. The camera caught every detail, the way her eyes narrowed at Andre's hoodie, the subtle hesitation before she asked for everyone's ID, the forced smile that never touched her eyes. Most damning of all was Zoe's face, caught in a close-up as she clung to her owl, eyes wide and glistening with confusion and hurt. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. On social media, the hashtag #CheckYourPrivilege trended, and comments poured in. "She asked if I was the help," wrote one viewer. "This is why we don't feel safe in places like this," posted another. The hotel's polished reputation cracked as the world watched, dissecting every micro-expression, every slight pause, every unspoken judgment. The staff group chat, usually filled with jokes and shift swaps, was silent except for a single message from the night manager. No comment to guests. All media requests go to PR. A janitor, old enough to remember when the hotel first opened, watched the video on his phone during break. He shook his head, remembering the resignation letter he'd written a decade earlier. The words "they called me boy until I quit" still echoing in his mind. He set his phone down, his hands steady, and returned to his work, but the weight of history pressed down heavier than ever. Meanwhile, Claire sat in the staff lounge, phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. Her face was pale, her hands cold. She scrolled through the comments, each one a blow to the certainty she'd always carried. The world had seen what happened in the lobby, and there was no hiding from it now. The pristine image of the hotel was gone, replaced by a raw public reckoning that would not be ignored. The hotel's online reputation began to unravel as one-star reviews poured in, each one a quiet confession of exclusion and discomfort. Guests recalled being shadowed through the lobby, their every movement tracked and questioned for reasons never explained. One review, written by a black bride, described how her wedding day was overshadowed by cold glances and whispered remarks. The joy of her celebration dimmed by barriers she could feel but never name. Her words painted a picture of a place where happiness was rationed and belonging was always conditional. A Latino valet's handwritten note surfaced, posted by a guest who had found it left behind in a car. The note described tips given with a condescending smile, a currency of discomfort exchanged in silence. It was a small moment, but it captured the daily reality of working in a place where respect was never guaranteed. The hotel's 5-star rating, once a point of pride, began to fall, replaced by a chorus of voices demanding acknowledgement and change. Behind the scenes, Claire's Instagram feed, once filled with #girlboss hashtags and polished selfies, became a lightning rod for outrage. Comments accusing her of bias and entitlement piled up, each notification a reminder that the world was no longer willing to excuse the subtle cruelties she had once hidden behind courtesy. The curated perfection of her online life was drowned out by the reality of her actions. In the staff room, tension was thick. A young bellhop, usually quick with a joke, now kept his head down, his smile strained and brief. The night manager paced the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, trying to manage a crisis that felt bigger than any press statement. The hotel's image, once a fortress of exclusivity, was cracking under the weight of truths that could no longer be contained. In quiet corners, employees exchanged glances that spoke of shared experience and quiet hope. The whispers that once carried fear now carried resolve, a collective voice rising from the margins, demanding dignity. The marble floors in the lobby, once a symbol of separation, now reflected the shifting tides. The hotel was no longer just a building. It had become a battleground for respect, a place where the shadows of the past were finally being chased into the light. Long before the hotel's marble floors gleamed beneath the weight of scrutiny, Marcus Johnson stood in a cramped bank office. Blueprints rolled under his arm and hope burning in his chest. The banker, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, barely glanced at the drawings before pushing them aside. "Black-owned, too risky," he said, voice flat, eyes fixed on the clock. Behind Marcus's head, the words landed like a verdict, final and unyielding. Marcus's hands tightened around the blueprints, knuckles white, but he kept his voice even. "I have the capital, I have the plan. All I need is a chance." The banker shook his head, already reaching for another file. "It's not personal. It's just how things are." Marcus left the bank with his dreams folded and tucked under his arm, the door closing behind him with a hollow thud. Outside, the city bustled, indifferent to his disappointment. He paused on the sidewalk, staring up at the skyline. Determination simmering beneath the sting of rejection. He would build the hotel anyway, brick by brick, with or without their help. Decades later, that same resolve echoed in every corner of the hotel. Marcus's penthouse overlooked the city, the view a testament, 2 battles fought and won. Yet, even as he stood surrounded by luxury, the memory of that bank office lingered, a reminder that every triumph was carved from resistance. The hotel's foundation was more than concrete and steel. It was built on the refusal to accept no as the end of the story, as news of the lobby incident spread. Marcus watched from his window, the city's lights flickering below. He remembered the banker's dismissive glance, the way opportunity had been rationed and dreams delayed. Now the world was finally seeing what he'd always known. The struggle was never just about one man or one moment. It was about every door closed, every chance denied, and the quiet defiance that turned those losses into legacy. In a back office, thick with the scent of old paper and lemon cleaner, Priya, the investigative journalist, sifted through a stack of forgotten personnel. Files. Her fingers paused on a crumpled envelope, the paper worn thin at the edges. Inside was a resignation letter dated 2010, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. "They called me boy until I quit," it read. No signature, just a smudge at the bottom where a hand had lingered too long, pressing down frustration and fatigue.priya. Read the letter twice, her jaw set. She thought about the man who had written it. How many years had he swept these halls? How many times had he been passed over for a simple greeting, a thank you, or even acknowledgement as an equal? The hotel's polished floors, gleaming for decades, had been cleaned by hands that were never truly seen. Each word in the letter was a record of dignity chipped away, day after day, until nothing remained but the choice to walk away. Downstairs, the current janitor, Mr. Lewis, pushed his cart past the lobby. He glanced up at the grand staircase. Remembering the stories older workers had shared in the break room, keep your head down, don't make waves. Yet now, as the scandal grew, he noticed guests meeting his eyes, some offering nods, others mumbling apologies they'd never have voiced before. The letter's truth was finally echoing through the marble halls. Priya tucked the letter into her notebook, determined to include its story in her expos. She knew the hotel's image was built on more than architecture and luxury. It was built on the backs of those who had been overlooked, dismissed, and called out of their names. The letter was no longer just a private resignation. It had become a public reckoning, a testament to the cost of dignity denied and the power of finally being heard. The manager's footsteps cut through the corridor, each one sharp and deliberate. A warning before the storm. He stopped at Claire's desk, his expression unreadable, but for the tension in his jaw. Without a word, he dropped a thick folder onto the polished surface. The sound drawing startled glances from the staff nearby. The papers inside shifted the edge of a resignation letter, peeking out a silent threat, a line in the sand. "Fix this or pack your desk." His voice was low, each word weighted and final. Claire's fingers twitched, her red nails tapping against the wood in a nervous staccato. The confidence she wore like armor began to slip, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty she couldn't hide. She tried to steady herself, but the usual mask of composure faltered as she looked up and met his gaze. Around them, the hotel's rhythm, continued guests checking in, a bellhop pausing with a luggage cart, the night manager's assistant glancing up from her stack of forms, lips pressed in a thin, worried line. The tension was palpable, a current running through every exchange. The bellhop hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot, unsure whether to stay or retreat. The assistant's pen hovered above her notepad. The next word forgotten. Claire swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I was just following the usual steps. The manager's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with disappointment. Those steps have consequences. We're not just running a hotel. We're accountable for what happens here. His words hung in the air, heavier than the folder between them. The space seemed to close in, the walls pressing tighter as Claire's world tilted. Her polished facade began to crack, the first threads of unraveling showing in her posture and the tremor in her hands. Outside, the muffled chants of protesters drifted through the glass. A reminder that the world was watching and that excuses would no longer be enough. Claire reached for the folder, her hand unsteady. The papers, now a symbol of a system demanding change. The manager turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the weight of what was to come. The marble floor beneath her reflected the fading daylight, a silent witness to the shifting tides within the hotel and within herself. Claire sat alone in the staff restroom, the echo of the manager's ultimatum still ringing in her ears. She stared at her reflection, searching for the authority she once projected so easily. Her hands, usually steady, now trembled as she smoothed her hair and tried to compose herself. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows, deepening the lines around her eyes. She leaned closer to the mirror, her voice barely audible as she muttered, "It was just routine." That's all it was, but the words sounded hollow even to her. She remembered the way Zoe had clutched her owl, the way Andre's eyes had met hers steady, unwavering, quietly judging. Claire's mind replayed every detail, the forced smile, the demand for all their IDs, the way she'd lingered on their names as if searching for an excuse. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, trying to block out the memory of the bellhop's sidelong glance and the receptionist's nervous cough. Outside the restroom, the hotel felt different. Staff moved with a new wariness, conversations dropping when Claire entered a room. The night manager, who once greeted her with a nod, now avoided her gaze. Even the assistant at the front desk, who used to share jokes about difficult guests, offered only a tight, uncomfortable smile. The atmosphere was thick with judgment. Every gesture a reminder that something fundamental had shifted. Claire's phone vibrated with another notification, another angry comment, another call for her. Resignation. She scrolled through the messages, her chest tightening with each accusation. You knew what you were doing. This isn't just a mistake. The world outside the hotel was no longer willing to accept excuses, no matter how carefully. Where did she look back at her reflection, searching for a way to make it right? But the mask of professionalism she'd always worn now felt brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Claire's whisper lingered in the air, a quiet confession to a world that had finally stopped listening. She realized then that routine was never an excuse, was a shield she'd hidden behind. And now, with the shield gone, she was left exposed, forced to face the truth she'd always tried to deny. Priya sat at the corner table of a bustling cafe, her notebook open and pages filled with a tapestry of names, dates, and fragments of stories. She flipped through each entry, her pen tapping against the margin as she reviewed the evidence she collected. Each line told a piece of a larger truth lawsuits filed by former staff, complaints about racial slurs whispered in service corridors, paychecks that never matched the hours worked. She paused on a page where a maid's story was, written in careful script. They said my accent was a problem. I cleaned rooms for years, but never got promoted. Priya underlined the sentence, her mind racing with the pattern emerging from these testimonies. She circled Claire's name in red, the ink bleeding. Through the thin paper mark of accountability that could no longer be erased, across from her, a former bellhop recounted how he was always assigned the night shift, rarely tipped, and never trusted with VIP guests. They said it was just the way things were, he said, his voice low. Priya nodded, jotting down every detail, determined to ensure that the way things were would no longer be an excuse. A montage of memories played in her mind. Black employees scrubbing floors while white guests passed by without a word. A front desk clerk quietly correcting a manager's mistake, only to be blamed for it later. A young server's resignation letter folded neatly in a drawer. Each story was a thread in the fabric of systemic injustice that had been woven into the hotel's history. Priya's phone buzzed with a new message. Another former employee, ready to talk. She added the name to her growing list, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about one incident at the front desk. It was about years of silence, about voices that had been pushed aside for too long. Her notebook was no longer just a collection of complaints. It was a record of truth, a blueprint for change, and a promise that the stories of those who had been overlooked would finally be heard. The digital storm began with a single tweet screenshot of Claire's frozen smile at the front desk, paired with Zoe's anxious grip on her owl. Within minutes, the hashtag #CheckYourPrivilege surged. Across timelines, social media feeds filled with stories from guests who had felt the sting of exclusion, each post a ripple in the growing wave. A viral video stitched together the hotel's security footage, Yelp reviews, and snippets from Priya's exposé, painting a portrait of bias that was impossible to ignore. On TikTok, a side-by-side clip showed Zoe's family being questioned, while a white guest breezed through check-in with a casual nod. The contrast was stark, the message unmistakable. Comments poured in, some angry, some heartbroken, many sharing their own experiences of being doubted, dismissed, or made to feel small. This happened to me last year. My mom cried in that lobby. The hashtag trended for days, drawing the attention of national news outlets and advocacy groups. Inside the hotel, staff scrolled through their phones in break rooms and service corridors, the weight of public scrutiny settling over every conversation. The night manager called an emergency meeting, his voice strained as he read the latest headlines aloud. "We're not just a story, we're a warning," he said, looking around at faces that were suddenly unsure, defensive, or quietly relieved that the truth was finally out. Claire's phone buzzed nonstop, the notifications relentless, her carefully curated online persona full of brunch photos and motivational quotes was buried under a flood of comments calling for accountability. She deleted old posts, but screenshots circulated faster than she could erase them. A meme of her tight smile beside Marcus's 1985 loan rejection letter went viral, the caption reading, "Some doors are closed for a reason." For the Johnson family, the hashtag was both vindication and exhaustion. Andre watched the coverage with a heavy heart, knowing their story was now part of a much larger reckoning. Nia hugged Zoe close, whispering that sometimes the world needed to see the truth before it could change. The hotel's marble floors, once a symbol of exclusion, now reflected a movement that refused to be swept aside. Marcus stood at the head of the boardroom table, his hands planted firmly on the polished wood. The room was thick with tension, the kind that settles deep into your bones and makes every breath feel deliberate. Shareholders shifted uneasily in their seats, eyes darting between Marcus and the growing pile of evidence laid bare before them, printouts of social media outrage, copies of old resignation letters, and a stack of formal complaints that could no longer be ignored. "We're done hiding," Marcus declared, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years spent fighting for a place at this very table. The words echoed off the paneled walls, a quiet thunder that demanded attention. One shareholder, older and skeptical, let out a dismissive scoff, but Marcus's gaze didn't waver. This was a moment of reckoning, a turning point where silence could no longer shield the truth. His wedding ring caught the light as he clenched his fist, a reminder of the personal battles behind this public fight. For a brief moment, his wife's face flashed in his mind, a black nurse denied ICU access in 1992. Her pain, a silent fuel for his resolve. The gavel's fall at the end of the table was not just a formality, it was a promise that things would never return to the way they were. Around the room, the atmosphere shifted. Some faces softened, others hardened, but none could deny the tide turning. Marcus's decision was more than a statement. It was a call to rebuild, to confront the rot beneath the surface, and to lead with integrity. The boardroom clock ticked louder, marking the end of an era and the beginning of something new. Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight of history pressing down but also lifting. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, hope felt tangible. "Let's get to work," he said, voice low but fierce, as the room leaned in, ready to follow. Claire scrolled through her phone in the break room, her thumb pausing over photos that now felt like relics from another life. Her feed, once a carefully curated collection of latte art, motivational quotes, and polished selfies, had become a battleground. The comments section under her latest post, Rise and Grind, was flooded with accusations, memes, and demands for accountability. Each notification was a jolt, a reminder that the world had seen past the filter. She tried to delete the most damning posts, but screenshots multiplied faster than she could erase them. Someone had turned her tight smile at the front desk into a protest sign, pairing it with the hashtag #GirlBully. Another post compared her Monday motivation selfie to a freeze frame from the security footage, the contrast impossible to ignore. Her inbox filled with messages, some angry, some mocking, a few quietly urging her to apologize and step down. In the staff hallway, a server glanced at Claire, then quickly looked away, the camaraderie of old shifts replaced by awkward distance. The assistant manager, who once shared inside jokes with her, now spoke in clipped sentences, his eyes never meeting hers. Even the night janitor, always polite, gave her a wide berth as he mopped the floor. Claire's hands shook as she watched a viral TikTok, a split screen of her demanding IDs and Zoe's anxious face, the caption reading, "This is why we speak." Up she closed the app, but the echo of her own actions lingered. The persona she'd built online had cracked, and the reality beneath was exposed for all to see. Her phone buzzed again, a calendar alert for a termination meeting. The words were stark, final. She set the phone down, staring at her reflection in the window. The world outside moved on, but inside, Claire felt the full weight of her choices. The applause of her online followers replaced by a silence that demanded she finally listen. The phone rang late in Priya's office, its shrill tone slicing through the quiet. She hesitated before answering, recognizing the number as blocked. On the other end, a voice trembled, older, weary, but determined to be heard. "I saw everything," the caller began, pausing as if weighing every word. "It worked. The front desk for years. I watched Claire target families. I kept my head down, told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, but I can't keep quiet anymore." Priya listened, pen poised over her notebook, capturing every detail. The caller described patterns. Certain guests always asked for extra. Paperwork, rooms double-checked, smiles that vanished the moment backs were turned. It wasn't just one day. It was the way things were done. The voice continued, thick with regret. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I thought if I just did my job, I wouldn't be part of it." But silence is its own kind of guilt. Outside, Priya's window, city lights flickered, indifferent to the confession unfolding in the dim glow of her desk lamp. The caller's voice broke. "I remember Zoe, the little girl with the owl. She looked so scared. I should have said something." Priya reassured the caller, her tone gentle but firm. "You're saying something now that matters." The call ended with a heavy sigh, a promise to testify if needed. Priya sat back, the weight of the story settling over her. She knew this was more than a single act of wrongdoing. It was a system built on complicity, on people looking away because it was easier than confronting the truth. The whistleblower's words would become part of her exposé, a final thread tying together the quiet suffering and the voices now rising to demand change. As Priya closed her notebook, she felt a shift in the air, a sense that finally the silence was breaking, and the reckoning was no longer just a headline but a living, breathing reality. The boardroom was colder than usual, the air thick with anticipation and the faint scent of old coffee. Marcus sat at the head of the long table, his tie perfectly knotted, a folder of evidence resting at his elbow. The ticking wall clock seemed louder than the murmurs of the assembled board members, each tick a reminder that time was running out. For excuses, Priya entered quietly, her notebook in hand, eyes scanning the room for any sign of resistance or remorse. Claire's chair sat empty, pushed slightly away from the table as if she'd left in a hurry. The absence was louder than any argument. A junior board member, usually eager to please, tapped his pen nervously, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in and halt the proceedings. The janitor, newly hired and wearing a crisp uniform, polished the brass nameplate outside the room, Johnson Towers. He paused for a moment, catching Marcus's eye through the glass, and gave a small, steady nod. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice steady but carrying the weight of every story that had surfaced in recent days. "We're not here to protect reputations. We're here to do what's right." He opened the folder, spreading out copies of complaints, social media posts, and Priya's notes. The room fell silent, the only sound, the relentless ticking of the clock. A senior board member shifted in her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "This is overdue," she said quietly, her words met with a chorus of hesitant nods. Priya slid her notebook across the table, the pages brimming with names, dates, and truths that could no longer be ignored. As the meeting drew to a close, Marcus signed the final document of formal commitment to overhaul hiring practices, implement bias training, and establish a transparent grievance process. The janitor outside replaced the old plaque with a new one, its letters gleaming in the overhead light. The boardroom emptied, but the sense of change lingered. The clock's ticking faded into the background, replaced by the quiet certainty that justice, though slow, had finally found its place within these walls. The chandeliers above dimmed, casting long shadows across the marble floor as the press conference began. Reporters leaned forward, their eyes sharp and pens ready, searching for the moment that would finally break the tension. Marcus stood at the podium, hands steady, voice calm but carrying the weight of everything that had led to this day. Claire stood a few steps away, her posture rigid, the professionalism first pin on her lapel catching the harsh, light-a-brittle emblem of a crumbling order. The room was thick with anticipation, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Cameras clicked, capturing every micro-expression, every subtle shift in posture. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze darting away from Marcus's unwavering eyes. The air felt heavier with each passing second, as if the hotel itself was waiting for a verdict. Marcus's voice finally cut through the quiet. This hotel was built, resisting systems designed to exclude. Today, we rebuilt those systems to include. His words landed with a force that rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in solemn agreement, others exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of change settling in. Claire's hands clenched at her sides, the pin on her lapel trembling as her confidence faltered. The weight of history pressed down, and the old order began to fracture in real time. The camera lingered on Claire's face as a single tear traced a path down her cheek, mascara smudging at the edges. Her pin slipped from her collar, falling to the floor with a soft clatter that seemed to echo in the stillness. Zoe, standing beside her father, watched quietly, clutching her stuffed owl, a small but powerful symbol of resilience and quiet strength. The room seemed to hold its breath, every person waiting for the world to crack open and let justice in. The chandeliers flickered, the silence deepened, and for a moment, it felt as if the very walls were listening, bearing witness to the end of an era and the beginning of something new. Marcus stood tall behind the podium, his hands gripping the edges as if anchoring himself to the moment. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of camera equipment and the restless shifting of reporters in their seats. He scanned the faces before him, some skeptical, some hopeful, all waiting for a sign that things could truly change. His voice, when it came, was steady and clear, resonating with quiet authority. This hotel was built by those who were told they didn't belong. Today, we commit to making sure that no one ever feels that way again. He paused, letting the words settle. A flashbulb popped, illuminating the deep lines of determination etched across his face. We're not here to patch cracks in a broken foundation. We're here to rebuild the system from the ground up. That means new leadership, new policies, and a new commitment to dignity for every guest and every employee. The statement landed with a weight that rippled through the crowd. A young reporter lowered her pen, her eyes shining with cautious optimism. Across the room, a janitor paused mid-mop, his eyes meeting Marcus's. For a brief moment, there was a silent exchange of recognition of shared struggle, of battles fought quietly in the shadows. Claire, standing off to the side, felt the ground shift beneath her. The pin that had fallen from her lapel now lay forgotten on the floor, a relic of an old order that no longer held sway. Marcus continued, his voice unwavering. We can't change the past, but we can choose who we become. We owe it to everyone who's walked these halls, who's been overlooked, passed over, or made to feel small. This is our promise. We rebuild together. The applause was tentative. At first, then grew, filling the space with hope and resolve. The chandeliers above seemed to shine brighter. Casting away the last shadows of exclusion, Andre stepped forward, his presence commanding yet calm, the kind of quiet strength that turned heads without raising a voice. He took the microphone from Marcus, glancing at Zoe beside him, her owl clutched tightly in her arms. The room's attention shifted, the anticipation almost tangible. Andre's gaze swept over the crowd, reporters, staff, board members, and guests, each person waiting for him to speak. He cleared his throat, letting the silence linger just long enough to make every word count. For too long, dignity has been treated like a reservation, code something you earn, something you prove, something you can be denied at a desk. His voice was steady, but each word carried the ache of lived experience. But dignity isn't a number. It's not a sweet upgrade. It's not a privilege you grant with a smile or take away with a raised eyebrow. A ripple moved through the audience. Claire, standing near the wall, felt her composure slip further, her hands tightening into fists. The bellhop in the back, usually invisible in these gatherings, nodded in agreement, his eyes shining with a mix of relief and pride. Andre continued. My family walked into this lobby and was met with suspicion, not welcome. We stood here, not because we wanted special treatment, but because we refused to shrink. We refused to let someone else define our worth. He glanced at Zoe, then back at the crowd. And we're not alone. Every person who's ever been questioned, doubted, or made to feel small in a place like this, your story matters. You matter. He set the microphone down, the gesture final, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. The applause that followed was not thunderous, but it was sincere, a collective acknowledgement that the rules had changed. Andre's quiet defiance had spoken louder than any outburst, and the room would never forget it. Claire stood at the edge of the room, her posture rigid, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. The applause for Andre's words washed over her, but she felt only the sting of exposure. She blinked hard, fighting the burn behind her eyes, but a single tear slipped free, tracing a dark line of mascara down her cheek. The cameras caught it, the moment freezing her in the harsh glare of the spotlights, her professionalism first pin. Once a badge of pride, felt heavy on her blouse. As she tried to adjust it, her fingers fumbled and the pin slipped, clattering to the marble floor. The sound was sharp, final, drawing the attention of those nearby. She bent to retrieve it, but her hand shook and she left it lying there. The symbol of her authority, abandoned and forgotten. A reporter in the front row scribbled furiously, eyes darting between Claire's crumbling composure and the steady resolve of the Johnson family. The bellhop, who had always kept his head down, now stood a little taller, watching as the old order fractured before his eyes. Even the night manager, usually stoic, looked away, unable to meet Claire's gaze. Claire's breathing grew shallow as she realized there was no script for this kind of reckoning. The mask she had worn for years, polished, unflappable, always in control, was slipping, revealing the uncertainty and regret beneath, replaced by a heavy stillness. Claire stood alone, exposed, her unraveling, witnessed by everyone in the room. The marble floor, once her stage, now reflected her downfall. She stepped back, shoulders sagging, the weight of her choices pressing down. The world had changed in a single afternoon, and there was no going back. As the room settled into a charged, quiet, Zoe stepped forward, her small hands wrapped around her beloved owl. She glanced up at her father, who nodded with gentle encouragement, then walked over to where Claire stood frozen, her pin still lying on the floor. Zoe's steps were soft but certain, who looked down in surprise, her face streaked with mascara and uncertainty. Zoe extended her owl, holding it out with both hands. "You looked scared," she said simply, her voice clear and honest. The words landed softly but with undeniable weight, echoing in the hush that had fallen over the crowd, but finding only empathy and a kind of quiet strength that seemed to radiate from Zoe's small frame. For a moment, neither moved. The cameras, which had been trained on the adults, now focused on the unlikely exchange. The bellhop, standing near the back, wiped his eyes, moved by the innocence and courage on display, then reached out with trembling hands to accept the owl. Her fingers brushed against Zoe's, and something in her posture softened. Had long been defined by suspicion and judgment. Zoe stepped back to her family, her head held high. The crowd began to murmur, the mood shifting from confrontation to reflection. Claire looked down at the owl, its glass eyes unblinking, and understood that justice had arrived not with anger, but with the simple, fearless kindness of a child. The moment marked a turning point, not just for Claire, but for everyone who witnessed it. Claire's memory flickered to a small kitchen, the scent of strong coffee and worn linoleum filling the air. Her mother stood by the stove, her voice sharp and unyielding. "Know your place," she said, eyes hard as stone. The maid, a young Latina woman, nodded silently, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The words hung heavy, a lesson passed down like a shadow. Claire, a child then, watched from the doorway, confusion and fear mingling in her chest. The maid's quiet acceptance was a survival tactic, a shield against a world that demanded submission. The scene replayed in Claire's mind. Standing in the hotel lobby, Claire felt the weight of that lesson pressing down on her. The same voice whispered in her ear as she questioned the Johnson family, a reminder of the boundaries she was taught to enforce. But now, the words felt brittle, their power waning in the face of quiet defiance. Zoe's owl, clutched tightly in the child's arms, was a symbol of innocence and resilience, qualities Claire's mother never understood. The memory was a fracture. In Claire's armor, a crack that hinted at the possibility of change. The past and present collided in the lobby's polished floors, the chandelier light casting long shadows that stretched between generations. Claire's gaze dropped to the owl, then to the family she had doubted, the walls she'd built around herself. The moment was silent but profound, a turning point where inherited prejudice met the quiet strength of those who refused to be diminished. The image of Zoe handing her owl to Claire swept across social media within hours, igniting a movement far beyond the hotel's marble walls. The hashtag dignity, not numbers, trended as people shared their own stories, photos of childhood toys, memories of being questioned, and moments when their worth was measured by suspicion instead of trust. Memes paired Claire's tear-streaked face with Marcus's old blueprint, a visual reminder that dignity was never about status or reservation codes. A viral tweet captured the moment. Zoe's owl, greater than Claire's pin. The hotel's Yelp page, once a graveyard of silent frustration, now bloomed with 5-star reviews from guests who felt seen for the first time I checked in and was greeted with respect. One wrote, "This place is changing, and so are we." Inside the hotel, the mood shifted. Staff who had once kept their heads down now exchanged knowing glances, the old fear replaced by a sense of possibility. The bellhop, emboldened by the wave of support, greeted guests with newfound confidence. The night manager, who had once avoided difficult conversations, started each shift with a promise. "We're here to make everyone feel welcome." Claire watched the hashtag swirl through her phone, the screen a blur of messages, some angry, some forgiving, all demanding honesty. She realized that her authority had never come from a pin or a title. It came from the way she treated others. And it could be rebuilt only through humility and change. For the Johnson family, the movement was both a bomb and a challenge. Andre and Nia knew that one moment of justice was not the end, but a beginning. Zoe, her owl now a symbol for thousands, smiled shyly at the attention, her quiet act of courage inspiring others to speak up. The hashtag continued to rise, a digital chorus echoing through the city. Dignity is not a number, and justice is not a privilege. The world was listening, and this time it refused to look away. In the aftermath of the press conference and the viral storm, the hotel's rhythm changed. The marble lobby, once a place of quiet exclusion, now pulsed with a new energy. At the edge of the morning rush, The janitor, Mr. Luesk, pushed his cart along the baseboards, his motions unhurried, his eyes quietly observant. He'd worked here for years, mostly invisible, his presence acknowledged only when something needed cleaning or fixing. Today, as Marcus passed through the lobby, he paused near Mr. Lewis. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them. No words were needed, just a small, respectful nod from Mr. Lewis and a gentle smile from Marcus in return. It was a gesture loaded with history and hope, a recognition of battles fought in silence and the possibility of a different future. Other staff noticed the exchange. The bellhop, usually reserved, straightened his jacket and greeted a guest with more warmth than usual. The receptionist, who had often looked past Mr. Lewis, now offered him a genuine good morning. Even the night manager, who had once hurried by without a glance, paused to thank him for his work. In the corner, Priya watched the lobby's subtle transformation, jotting notes for her next headline. The day the lobby fought back, she saw how the small acts of respect and acknowledgement rippled outward, changing the atmosphere one interaction at a time. The marble floor, polished by years of overlooked labor, now reflected not just light, but the dignity of those who had long been unseen. But Mr. Lewis continued his rounds, his head held a little higher. For the first time, he felt the weight of his work was recognized, not just as maintenance, but as part of the hotel's new foundation. The nod he shared with Marcus was more than a greeting. It was a promise that the days of silent suffering were ending, and that solidarity, even in its quietest form, could change everything. Claire's departure from the hotel was nothing like the confident arrivals she once made, her heels echoing power across the marble. Now, each step felt uncertain, the sound sharp and brittle against the polished floor. She clutched her bag tightly, shoulders drawn in, eyes fixed on the revolving door ahead. The lobby, once her stage, seemed to shrink around her, every detail. Sharper, every glance from staff and guests, a reminder of what had changed. As she passed the reception desk, the new trainee offered her a polite but distant nod. The bellhop, who had once scrambled to assist her, focused on a guest's luggage, barely acknowledging her presence. Even Mr. Lewis, the janitor, paused his work only long enough to meet her gaze with a look that was neither cruel nor honest, a mirror of the reality she now faced. Outside, reporters waited, their cameras ready, but the crowd was smaller than she had feared. The story had moved on, and so had the world inside the hotel. Claire's heels caught on a crack in the pavement as she hurried toward the curb, the stumble unnoticed by most, but deeply felt by her. A taxi splashed through a puddle, flecking her skirt with muddy water. She flagged it down, her voice subdued, no longer carrying the authority it once did. As the taxi pulled away, Claire glanced back at the hotel's entrance. The new sign gleamed in the morning light, the words Johnson Tower Zest. In Resistance, a final, silent verdict. Her reflection in the window was unfamiliar mascara faded, shoulders slumped, the mask of certainty gone. The hotel doors closed behind her, not with drama, but with the quiet finality of a chapter ending. Inside, life moved forward. Staff returned to their routines, guests checked in, and the lobby's energy shifted toward something new. Claire's exit was not marked by outrage or applause, but by the unmistakable sense that the balance of power had changed, and that her story was now just one thread in a much larger tapestry of transformation. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the hotel's entrance as workers carefully removed the old sign, each letter coming down with a sense of finality. The new name, Johnson Towers, in Resistance, was revealed in bold, fresh paint, gleaming in the soft light. The transformation was more than cosmetic. It was a public declaration that the era of exclusion was over, replaced by a commitment to dignity and belonging. Marcus stood nearby, arms crossed, his posture relaxed, but his eyes shining with quiet pride. He watched as Andre and Zoe joined the workers, their faces bright with hope. Zoe clutched her stuffed owl, the same one that had witnessed every moment of their journey. Now, it was more than a comfort, it was a symbol of courage, of innocence. That had sparked real change. As the last letter was secured, Marcus pulled Andre into a firm embrace. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice low but steady, the words carrying the promise of a new legacy. Inside, the lobby buzzed with energy. Laughter and conversation filled the air, voices mingling in different languages. The new front desk team, diverse and genuinely welcoming, greeted guests with warmth that felt real, not rehearsed. The black general manager adjusted his tie, surveying the scene with satisfaction as the staff moved with a confidence that had been missing for years. The marble floors, once a cold boundary, now reflected the light of inclusion. Zoe waved at Mr. Lewis, the janitor, who smiled back, his nod a silent pledge that the work of change would continue. The chandeliers overhead seemed to sparkle brighter, their light illuminating every corner, no longer casting shadows of exclusion. Somewhere, Claire's old stuffed owl sat on a thrift store shelf, waiting to comfort another child, a quiet reminder that healing and growth can follow even the darkest moments. As the hotel doors opened wide, welcoming all who entered, Johnson Towers stood as a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of resilience and unity. The story wasn't over, but for the first time, everyone who stepped through those doors knew they belonged. Claire's hands, once adorned with flawless red polish, now bear the marks of long shifts and endless scrubbing. Her nails are chipped, the color faded, each imperfection a silent record of the hours spent wiping coffee stains from chipped Formica tables. The diner smells of burnt toast and old grease. A far cry from the polished marble and fresh flowers of the hotel lobby she once ruled, she moves quietly between booths, her hospitality-certified apron stained and wrinkled, hanging heavy around her neck like a reminder of what she's lost. Customers rarely meet her eyes. Some recognize her, exchanging whispers that grow louder than the clatter of plates and the hiss of the coffee machine. A pair of former hotel guests slide into a booth, their conversation halting as Claire approaches to pour their coffee. They avoid her gaze, murmuring a clipped thank you before turning away, their discomfort palpable. Claire forces a smile, but it doesn't reach her eyes. The power she once wielded with a glance or a curt word has evaporated, replaced by a quiet, aching humility. In the kitchen, the cook calls out an order, his tone brusque but not unkind. Claire wipes her hands on her apron, glancing down at the faded badge sewn into the fabric, a relic of her former life. She remembers the pride she once felt, the certainty that came with authority. Now, every stain on her apron feels like a tally of her mistakes. Every chip in her nail polish a reminder that respect, once lost, is hard to reclaim. As she clears a table, a child points at her hands, whispering to her mother. The mother, gently, pulls the child close, her eyes flickering with something like pity. Claire catches her reflection in the window, tired, older, but perhaps a little wiser. The world she built her confidence on has shifted, and she is left to serve in silence. Learning humility one cup at a time. Under the harsh glare of the diner's fluorescent lights, every imperfection on Claire's apron stands out. The once fabric is now a patchwork of coffee splashes, syrup drips, and grease marks that no amount of scrubbing can erase. She ties it tighter around her waist, the gesture more habit than hope. Knowing each stain tells a story she'd rather forget, the apron, meant to protect, now feels like a symbol of everything she's lost: her status, her certainty, her place in the world she once controlled. A toddler in a booster seat points at Claire's apron, ketchup near the hem. "Look, Mommy, she's messy." The mother hushes him quickly, offering Claire an apologetic glance before turning her attention back to her phone. Claire forces a smile, but inside, the shame stings. She remembers the days when her uniform was pressed and pristine, her appearance a source of pride and power. Now, she blends into the background, just another server in a crowded diner, her authority replaced by anonymity. Between orders, Claire catches her reflection in the polished chrome of the coffee machine. Her eyes look hollow, ringed with fatigue, the lines at the corners deeper than she remembers. She wipes at a fresh spot on her apron, but the stain only spreads. The hotel lobby, with its chandeliers and marble, feels impossibly distant, to different life, a different woman. The other servers move around her with practiced ease, some offering brief smiles, others keeping their distance. No one asks about her past, but the unspoken questions hang in the air. Claire focuses on her tasks, clearing tables and refilling cups, each motion a small act of penance. The apron, heavy with the weight of regret, is a constant reminder. Some marks never wash out, and some lessons are learned only when pride is stripped away. Outside the hotel, a small crowd gathers beneath the morning sun, their faces bright. With anticipation, workers carefully remove the old brass sign, revealing a new plaque that gleams against the marble, built by Resistance. Tourists pause to take photos, their cameras clicking as the light catches the fresh engraving. A black family steps forward, their children running their fingers over the letters, tracing the words with reverence and pride. The father nods, a quiet affirmation that this place now stands for more than just luxury. It stands for survival, for dignity reclaimed. Inside, the marble floor that once seemed so cold and forbidding now mirrors the warmth of the people who fill the lobby. The space feels transformed not just by the new sign, but by the energy of guests and staff who move with a sense of belonging. The air is filled with laughter, the sound of suitcases rolling, and the gentle hum of conversation. In many languages, the barriers that once separated guests by race or class have faded, replaced by a spirit of welcome and inclusion. Claire's old desk sits empty, a thin layer of dust gathering on her discarded nameplate. No one rushes to claim her spot. The power she once wielded has dissolved into memory. The new front desk team, diverse and attentive, greets each guest with genuine smiles. Their warmth, a stark contrast to the rigid formality of the past. The hotel's transformation is visible in every detail, from the art on the walls to the way staff interact with one another. As the crowd outside disperses, the plaque remains a permanent reminder of the journey from exclusion to acceptance. For those who once felt unwelcome, the hotel is now a place of pride, a symbol of change made real. The marble floor, polished by years of overlooked footsteps, now reflects a future built not on privilege, but on the shared strength of those who refuse to be denied. The lobby now pulses with new life. At the front desk, a young trainee with a rainbow pin on their lapel welcomes guests, their laughter ringing out as they share a joke with a couple checking in. Their presence is a quiet celebration of authenticity, forced smiles, no hidden judgments, just genuine warmth. The black general manager, impeccably dressed and exuding calm authority, moves through the space with confidence, pausing to shake hands with returning guests and offer guidance to new staff. Every interaction feels intentional, every greeting sincere. The energy in the lobby is different, lighter, more open. Languages blend together as families from all backgrounds gather at the check-in line, their conversations overlapping in a pleasant hum. No one is rushed, no one is overlooked. The staff, once wary and reserved, now move with a sense of pride and ease. The old culture of suspicion and quiet exclusion has been replaced by a spirit of welcome that radiates from every corner. Claire's absence is felt only in the way the air no longer carries the weight of judgment. The revolving door spins freely. Guests entering and leaving without hesitation or second-guessing, the new team at the desk works seamlessly, supporting one another with smiles and quick words of encouragement. Even the bellhop, who used to keep his head down, now greets guests by name and offers travel tips with enthusiasm. As Marcus passes through the lobby, he exchanges a nod with the general manager, both men sharing a look of satisfaction. The transformation is unmistakable. The hotel's reputation has shifted from exclusivity to inclusion, from rigid formality to genuine connection. The front desk, once a barrier, is now a bridge proof that change is possible when dignity and diversity are placed. At the heart of hospitality. In a sunlit conference room overlooking the city, Marcus unrolls a set of blueprints across the table. The papers are covered in sketches-wide reading rooms, vibrant art studios, a courtyard filled with benches and murals. At the center of it all is a large, colorful drawing of Zoe's owl, planned as the heart of a mural that will greet every child who enters. Around the table, community leaders, architects, and educators lean in, their faces bright with hope and determination. "This is Zoe's place," Marcus announces, his voice steady. "A youth center built for every child who's ever felt out of place or overlooked." He gestures to the plans, highlighting spaces designed for creativity, mentorship, and belonging. The vision is clear: a haven where young people can learn, dream, and grow without fear of judgment or exclusion. Outside, the first shovels break ground. Zoe, holding her beloved owl, stands beside her parents as the builders begin their work. She kneels to place the owl gently in the soil, a quiet blessing for the future. The clang of metal against earth echoes across the lattice, strike a promise that justice is not just a word, but an action. Parents, neighbors, and children gather to watch, their applause mingling with the sounds of construction. As the day unfolds, the community's excitement grows. Volunteers sign up to paint murals, teachers offer to lead workshops, and local businesses pledge support. The youth center is more than a building. It is a symbol of what can happen when a community chooses hope over history and action over apology. Inside, Marcus rolls up the blueprints, his eyes shining with pride. The journey from exclusion to empowerment is far from over, but with every brick laid and every child welcomed, the foundation grows stronger. Zoe smiles as she watches the work begin. Her owl, now part of something much bigger, legacy of belonging for generations to come. Priya sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop illuminating stacks of notes and highlighted interview transcripts. Her article's headline blinked at the top of the screen. Accountability checked in. She read it aloud, the words settling over her like a final, satisfying exhale. The story chronicled every step of the hotel's transformation. From the viral footage and public outcry to the unveiling of the new plaque and the groundbreaking of Zoe's place, each paragraph was a testament to the power of truth, the courage of those who spoke up, and the necessity of real, lasting change. Across the city, the articles spread quickly. On social media, readers shared quotes and snapshots, their comments filled with relief and hope. Finally, someone told the whole story. One post read, "This is what justice looks like," wrote another. The hotel's Yelp page, once a graveyard of complaints, now bloomed with 5-star reviews and messages of gratitude. Guests praised the new staff, the sense of welcome, and the visible commitment to fairness. Even those who had never visited felt the ripple of change, inspired to demand more from the places they frequented. In the diner, she caught a glimpse of her own name, her hands trembling as she set down the mug. The ink on the page felt permanent, a record of her actions and the consequences that followed. For a moment, she lingered by the counter, listening as patrons discussed the story. Some voices were critical, others forgiving, but all agreed. The truth was out, and there would be no going back. Priya closed her laptop, her work done for now. She knew that headlines alone couldn't heal wounds or erase history, but they could shine a light where darkness had lingered too long. The story was no longer just high-writ, belonged to everyone who had fought, endured, and finally been seen. Ink, she realized, could be justice to dot in the newly transformed hotel lobby. Zoe stood before the gleaming plaque that read "Built by Resistance." Her small fingers traced the engraved letters, feeling the cool metal beneath her touch. Andre watched from a few steps away, pride in his eyes as he listened to his daughter repeat the words he'd spoken so many times before. Change doesn't roar, it whispers. Zoe's voice was soft, but in the quiet of the lobby, it seemed to echo, carrying a message that reached every corner of the space. A young white boy, curious and hesitant, approached Zoe. He looked at the plaque, then at her, his brow furrowed with a question he wasn't sure how to ask. "What does it mean?" he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zoe smiled, her expression open and kind. She held out her owl, the same one that had comforted her through every trial, and placed it gently in his hands. "It means you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the smallest voice can change everything." The boy's mother watched from nearby, her eyes shining with tears as she witnessed the quiet exchange. She knelt beside her son, pulling him into a gentle embrace. Around them, guests paused to watch, the moment settling over the lobby like a blessing. The owl passed from Zoe to the boy, became a bridge between their worlds, a symbol of empathy, understanding, and the possibility of healing. Andre joined his daughter, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Together, they stood in the glow of the morning light, surrounded by the hum of conversation and the warmth of a community finally learning to listen. The change was not loud or dramatic, but it was real, woven into every interaction, every smile, every act of kindness that followed. As Zoe and her new friend walked away, the plaque caught the sunlight, its message shining brighter than ever. Change, they knew, would continue to whisper through these halls. Long after the headlines faded, on the other side of town, sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of a small thrift store. Among the rows of forgotten toys and secondhand treasures, Zoe's stuffed owl sat perched on a shelf, its glass eyes still bright with the memory of everything it had witnessed. The owl had traveled far from the marble floors and heavy silences of the hotel, but it carried with it the quiet strength and hope that Zoe had given it. A black girl with neatly braided hair wandered the aisles with her mother, her eyes lighting up as she spotted the owl. She reached for it, hugging the soft toy close to her chest. Her mother smiled, watching as her daughter whispered secrets to her new friend, unaware of the history stitched into every scene. The owl, once a shield against judgment and fear, now became a companion for new adventures, a silent guardian for another child learning to find her place in the world. Outside, the city moved on. Buses rumbled past, people hurried to work, and the newly renamed Johnson Towers stood tall against the skyline. Its awning, once a symbol of exclusion, now offered shelter to all who entered. The hotel's doors opened wide, welcoming guests with genuine warmth and respect. Inside, the lobby buzzed with laughter and conversation, the air alive with the promise of new beginnings. Back at the diner, Claire flinched at the sound of the bell above the door, a sound that once meant authority and now signaled humility. She glanced at her chipped nails and stained apron, feeling the weight of lessons learned. The world had changed, and so had she, shaped by the small acts of courage and kindness that rippled outward from a single moment of justice. The owl, thriving in its new home, was a reminder that healing is possible, that stories can be rewritten, and that even the quietest voices can inspire transformation. In every corner of the city, change continued to whisper, carried forward by those who refused to let hope fade.